It's an honor to be here with you this evening. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor for me to be here as a recently minted septuagenarian. How could I ever have imagined, as a tomboy in a pair of yellow shorts, growing up over my mother's family fruit shop, Henry & Co., at 139 Liverpool Street, struggling up Harrington in my green school uniform, lugging a heavy Globite case, or cycling carefree through the streets of Hobart on a Malvern Star. How could I ever have imagined that my journey through life on this island and in the world beyond would lead to this honor to stand before you this evening to help mark International Women's Day 2015. For all of us, life is a journey, not usually a journey on a straight path, but one that meanders and twists, often with injuries and accidents en route, but one that takes us to new terrain, new people, ideas, experiences that mold and change us, preferably into better human beings. When I consider my life's journey as a Chinese Tasmanian, I think of 4 women: my maternal grandmother, my older maternal aunt, my mother, and my sister. They each molded my life, so very different from theirs, and their lives, compared with the lives of younger family members today, show that despite continuing inequality between men and women, the historical journey has been and continues upwards. Let me begin with the life of my maternal grandfather, Jin Chung Henry. Not a very Chinese name, you might think. Grandfather asked the signwriter to paint Henley, meaning doing well, making a profit, over his first business outside. Instead of painting Henley, the signwriter wrongly thought that grandfather, like some Chinese, couldn't pronounce the letter R. So he wrote Henry. And when grandfather saw the mistake, of course, he chuckled. Oh, Henry is the name of English kings. Henry will be better for business. I shall call myself Mr. Henry of Henry & Co. Grandfather first stepped foot in the Tasmanian tin fields in 1901, the year of Federation and the year the White Australia policy was born. He came to find his fortune, but first he had to find his father. He had been gone for almost all of grandfather's 16 years, and not a penny had he ever sent home. When the son found his father in an opium den, the son understood. Great-grandfather, like so many of his compatriots, toiling in harsh conditions for endless years so far from home, had become an opium addict. Grandfather found no time for the pipe. He worked tirelessly, and within 2 years saved enough to send his father back to China to die, because only in the motherland can a Chinese spirit rest in peace. Then grandfather trekked to Launceston, where he hawked vegetables from door to door from baskets hanging down from his shoulders. He ventured south, opened a laundry, then a tobacco shop, and then set himself up and became Hobart's leading fruit and vegetable merchant. Henry & Co., with its retail and wholesale outlet, supplied clubs and hotels, Government House, and the Archbishop's Palace. Success enabled grandfather to make 5 return trips back to China, including to his native county, Taishan. And on his second visit, he married Mary Lum Lee. Unlike her husband, my grandmother still retained all the traditional prejudices of China. And when their firstborn arrived, when they were still in the village, the baby proved a bitter disappointment to the mother. "What use are you, a girl?" grandmother ranted, cursed the infant. "I should have strangled you and thrown you in the river." Grandfather had to scour the village, and he paid to adopt a 3-year-old son. Only a son can honor the ancestors. Only a son can worship his parents in their old age. A girl is worthless. A girl will only marry and belong to someone else's family. A girl cannot continue the family name, the name Grandfather Jin would himself later change to Henry. My Aunt Joyce was never allowed to forget that she was an unwanted daughter. Though her father loved her and showed only kindness, Aunt Joyce received only abuse from her mother, cruelty. Even when growing up in Hobart and working from dawn to dusk in the shop and helping to bring up her younger brothers and sisters, Joyce received only abuse. "You should never have been born." This lack of maternal love drove Joyce to religion. "My mother didn't love me," she told me, "so I found Christ's love." On a return visit to China, Joyce was baptized under the twin towers of Canton Cathedral, and back in Hobart she had her younger siblings baptized in St. Mary's Cathedral. When their father lay at death's door, Archbishop Simmons, in black soutane, purple sash and biretta, ascended the stairs of the shop, administered the last rites, and saved grandfather's soul. Joyce's religious faith, the outcome of having been born female, would give rise to generations of Tasmanian Chinese Catholics. My grandmother loved her first son, adored baby Gordon, adored him. She also loved her next son, Lester. But my grandmother had no time for her next baby, my mother, Dorothy. "You should have been put in a bucket and drowned at birth." This attitude towards girls didn't die with my grandmother. It continues to this day, especially in rural India and China. Together with China's one-child policy, female infanticide continues. It gives rise to abortions and orphanages filled with baby girls. Of all the Australian adoptions of Asian babies, how many of those babies are baby boys? China's sex ratio is 116 boys to 100 girls. This severe gender imbalance gives rise to abductions of girls to become forced brides and to sexual slavery. And there are now some 30 million more young Chinese men under 30 than there are young Chinese women under 30. And those extra 30 million young men can't find wives. So the attractive, educated, middle-class Chinese women have the whip. 5 minutes viewing of the entertainment hit program, online dating program, which you can see on SBS, If You Are the One, shows just how choosy those females can be. Then there's last year's iPhone proposal. Some tech nerd spent $100,000, that's 2 years of his salary, 17 years for an ordinary Chinese worker, to buy 99 iPhones. He arranged them in a heart shape on the ground, stood in the center, bouquet in hand, and before friends and family proposed to his beloved, only to be knocked back. iPhones aren't the answer. 90 years ago, my mother survived the bucket and drowning. But she was reared not on milk, but on rice water. This gave her rickets, and she spent 3 years as a child in leg irons, and it exacerbates her high risk of falling today. Despite her mother's attitude, Dorothy's father tried to spoil her. He bought her a violin. He even paid for lessons. But after a year, despite Dorothy's high marks, her mother put her foot down. A waste of money. You're only a girl, only fit to work in the shop. No more lessons. When grandfather died, Dorothy was devastated. Her world collapsed. She had nothing. She left school, aged 14, 15. She had a nervous breakdown. Inevitably, the law of life reasserted itself with the will to live. And the Mercury named her Miss China 1942, set to work for the Allied cause in the Hobart Town Hall. And about this time, she met her brother's friend, charming Charles Chung, from Hobart's other main Chinese family of fruit merchants. He won her with his gallantry and sweet words. The pair married, and my mother gave birth to my sister Helene. And her name means something special or something beautiful, suggested by grandfather Chung. When Helene was being born, our mother, was heavily sedated from 10 in the morning till 6 that night, until she was awakened, still groggy. "Oh, Mrs. Chung, you have a beautiful baby daughter." The little bundle was so groggy she couldn't open her eyes. She was so groggy she couldn't take to the breast. 6 days passed before Helene could suck. She never showed the normal strength of a baby. My sister's frailty would persist for life. Next time, Dorothy had minimum medication, and when the nurse at the new Calvary Hospital handed her another little bundle, I began sucking within seconds. And within 5 months, I assumed the size of a sumo wrestler. Dorothy's marriage and the birth of Helene improved relations between Dorothy and her mother. Grandmother adored Helene. The tot could do no wrong. If Helene picked up an egg and let it fall to the floor, Grandmother exclaimed, "Oh, isn't she clever?" Grandmother lavished Helene, and later me, with delicate, expensive garments from Easton's babywear store, garments of such quality that some have been preserved and recently donated to the Tasmanian Museum. When we were still very young, the marriage broke down. Despite attempts at reconciliation, Dorothy eventually left Chung Sing & Co., the shop our parents had started, and walked with Helene and me up one block back to Henry & Co. This was daring, if not outrageous. And in 1946, so far from Hollywood, their divorce shocked Hobart. In her early 20s, and with so little schooling, Dorothy thought she might gain a degree of independence through hairdressing. Too old to be apprenticed in Hobart, she studied in Sydney, and on the advice of Hobart artist Eileen Brooker, who painted her portrait, Dorothy paid for her fees through modelling. And this led her to a cultural milieu of art, books and ideas in Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart that would encompass Helene and me. When I was about 10, we moved from the shop when Mama set up house with New Zealand-born radio announcer Rex Walden. Then in my early teens, we moved to Longley in the countryside to be with artist, author, Egyptologist and former founding director of Adult Education Tasmania, Leslie Greener. Both Rex Walden and Leslie Greener, as broadcasters, directly influenced the course of my career. But as children, Helene and I weren't exhorted to get top marks or else. Ours was no Amy Chua tiger mother. In fact, I hardly knew what a Bunsen burner was, and I could never get Hannibal over the Alps. But we were exhorted to get an education, make ourselves as independent as possible, and not to leave ourselves fit only to work in a shop. However, our lives as children were not normal. From this distance, after so many decades that have transformed Australia into a multicultural country where social mores are relaxed, where anything, seemingly everything, is acceptable, it's hard to register the rules that governed that vanished Hobart of my childhood. Except when I began school in that year, 1950, and just as I was leaving, Helene and I were the only two Chinese among 500 to 600 girls. We were the only two who could be called the name Ching Shong Chinaman, a term of abuse now so outdated it has to be explained to young Australians. I can even send myself up by calling myself a Ching Chong China girl. Secondly, of all the mothers, of all the girls of school, ours was the only one who was divorced. And, of course, she was the only one who used her maiden name, Miss Henry, when Miss referred only to a young, unmarried lady or to a spinster. Spinster? Like Chung Chinaman, that too has vanished from use. Thirdly, our mother was an artist's model. She modelled full figure, that is, nude before men, at a time when women wore hats and gloves in the street, when hems hung below the knee, and when not so much as a lower thigh dared peep into view. Fourthly, our mother lived in sin. First with one man, then with two, refusing respectability, if that were possible, refusing respectability and marriage until it no longer mattered to Helene and me. But throughout our childhood, being so different from everyone else did matter to Helene and me. Now I realize that we reacted to this difference. We dealt with this difference in our different ways due to our different temperaments. I tended to shrug things off by showing off or just playing around, playing the fool, acting on stage, perhaps pretending that this difference from everyone else didn't matter. Helene, quiet and shy, turned inwards, rarely being heard, perhaps drowned out by her one-time sumo wrestler little sister. Helene grew from a quiet and gentle child to a quiet and gentle lady, always an avid reader. After matriculation, she joined the Tasmanian State Library, then moved to the ABC Library Melbourne, then Baillieu Library at Melbourne University. In 1972, she joined me in London, and there she settled. She married an older English businessman, David Goodenday, graduated in arts from the London Polytechnic and as a librarian from the London Polytechnic. No, the arts degree came from the Open University. But in 3 decades, Helene flew back to Australia, the land of her birth, but 6 times. London became home, and that's where she would die, in the bittersweet winter of New Year's Day 2001. On that last day, as Helene reflected on our childhood and how our mother had shocked Hobart, and how she had called herself Miss Henry, Helene mimicked gently, quietly, with a mocking smile, Miss Henry. Now, when I think about that, I realize the other girls must have thought we were illegitimate. Laugh, because illegitimacy, like Ching Chong Chinaman, like spinster, has vanished. Except in the history books of English and European royalty. But as a product of mid-20th century Hobart, Helene was part of that history. And she remembered it to her dying day. In 1963, aged 19, Helene was very closely attached to a student here on this campus. In 1963, that pair, after 2 years of friendship, ventured for the first time into territory then reserved only for wedded couples. Their transgression led to Helen's pregnancy. Now, as unwed pregnancies are hardly rare, another term of the era was shotgun marriage. However, the young man's Anglo-Celtic parents of their era from the northwest of Tasmania insisted, drop her. Drop her or we'll drop you. We'll stop supporting you. I don't know if that would have been their reaction had she been blue-eyed and called Lucy Brown. I don't suggest that a shotgun marriage would have been in anyone's best interest. But that left Helene with the decision of bringing up her illegitimate baby, letting our mother bring up Helen's illegitimate baby, or following the course of the era, adoption. Now, in my university circle of that era, in the old Nick Theatre Company, was a well-known shotgun marriage. The father-to-be simply mentioned in passing one day during rehearsals, "Oh, we got married over the weekend." In another case of unwed pregnancy, the mother courageously kept her baby and courageously gave her baby the absconding father's surname, much to his anger and the anger of the absconding father's mother. The absconding father promptly changed his name to disown, to distance himself from the shame of his own illegitimate baby. Well, the absconding father's mother, years later, when a famous author wrote about her own illegitimacy. In 1965, age 20, I began to take the pill. I may have been amongst the first in Hobart to do so. I don't even know if the pill was available to unmarried women in 1965 in Hobart because my supply came from interstate. But taking the pill was and still is considered sinful by the Catholic Church. So rather than live a lie, I chose to live the truth and lapsed into what might be called a cultural Catholic. Half a century on, Catholic women still face the dilemma: contraception or the church. Back in 1963, Helene faced the dilemma of what would be best for her baby. Weighing on her mind was how we had grown up so outside the norm. Also weighing on her mind was how our childhood was strained by constant rows over who would pay the bills. Now, grandmother, after grandfather's death, had decreed that Helene and I were to be brought up as Henrys by Henry and Co. But when grandmother died before I turned 3, her will, in the Chinese tradition, gave everything to her 3 sons. Her 3 daughters received naught, even though they, especially Aunt Joyce, had helped build the business. Now, Uncle Lester and Uncle Gordon were wonderful to Helene and me, but strictly, we weren't their responsibility. We were our mother's responsibility. And she had to ask for every penny she received. She had to haggle over every bill that arrived. And when the going got tough, she entreated Helene, "Pet, you go and cry to Uncle Lester." Now, Helene didn't have to cry, because as his favourite, she just stood at his feet, shyly, unconsciously, twisting her hair around her little finger. He wrote out a cheque. As Helene would reminisce as an adult in London, we had the best of everything. But what we had to go through to get it. No child should have to go through what we went through. It would take Gough Whitlam from 1972, with his policies of equal pay for equal work and the sole parent's payment, to revolutionize the lives of women. But back a decade in Longley, Helene faced the problem of what would be best for her baby. She weighed up our unconventional, our bohemian childhood with our financially insecure childhood. And she decided that the best for her baby would be life within the norm, through adoption into a conventional, secure, married, middle-class family. She made that painful, that wrenching decision. Meanwhile, she kept her pregnancy a secret. She took leave from the State Library on the pretext of looking after an ailing mother. And she kept her unborn baby hidden behind a loose grey buttoned mohair cardigan and confined herself to the countryside at Longley, except when Mama drove her each fortnight to the gynecologist in Hobart, where the thoughtful receptionist admitted them through a side door to avoid the eyes, and the front too, of respectable married mothers-to-be. Helene kept her secret for 33 years until reunited with her baby. By then, a handsome 33-year-old professional. Mother and son bonded perfectly, feeling an intensity of love, complete. Helene changed. She had her hair cropped, letting go of the past. she found her voice. Without a note, she stepped onto a platform, and before a crowd of family and friends, she introduced her son to London. She wrote a letter on the adoption triangle that was published in the Times. Alas, the emotional feelings became so overwhelming. Within 4 years, my always fragile sister was no more. Had Helene survived, she would have delighted in her granddaughter, my grandniece Chloe. Now 12, mainland-born Chloe has spent half her life in Britain and France. Like Helene, she's quietly spoken and rather shy. But Chloe speaks fluent French and English. She rides a horse with confidence. She loves to draw. And with her little sister, she has the whole world before her. Her life's journey is not restricted by her gender. Not for a second did she face the bucket of Chinese infanticide. Had she been a boy, she could not have been more lavished with love. And had her parents chosen not to marry, no matter. And when Chloe faces her first job interview, she won't be told, as was I, when I applied for my first job as a trainee at the ABC, only to be rejected. Oh, you're as good as some of the best boys. But of course you have to understand that all things being equal, if we have to choose between a boy and a girl, we'd have to choose the boy, because you're going to get married and all the training would be wasted. I sat nodding in agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, however much women still lag behind men, however much more still needs to be achieved, from my vantage point of 70 years and 10, I see the progress of womanhood moving upwards. And I cannot but be optimistic for the new generation of young women as they embark on their journeys through life.